This meeting is being recorded.
Right. Okay. Right. Buddhu Saranai, let me welcome our Venerable Theros, also our committee members and invitees, and also all our Dhamma friends to this month's Medin Full Moon Poya Day International Dhamma Program. We have been conducting these programs every month, and this month we are having two programs. One is the afternoon program starting at 3 o'clock and the evening program at 6 o'clock. So today on this very special day, we have Bhante Sujato, who's been with us many times, and I must thank and pay merit to Bhante for making himself available to conduct the Dhamma program today. So the topic that we are having today is the role of Kamma, bridging inner growth and outer action in Buddhism. So this, I think, is a topic that Bhante has also recommended to us, and I'm sure that all our Dhamma devotees would be very happy to listen to this Dhamma talk on the role of Kamma. Speaking a little on Bhante Sujato, also known as Ajahn Sujato or Bhikkhu Sujato, is an Australian Buddhist teacher and monk in the Theravada tradition. In 2005, Bhante Sujato co-founded Sutta Central, an online digital library of early Buddhist texts that includes translations into English from the Pali, Chinese, and Tibetan languages. Since 2012, Bhante Sujato has focused on translation of the Pali Suttas into English. These translations are freely available at Sutta Central. I think at our last Dhamma talk also, Bhante mentioned of the great work that Bhante is going to do for Sri Lanka. So we are very happy that Bhante is making available these Tripitaka to our Sri Lankan the Buddhist ministry, which will distribute it to the various institutions that are teaching the Dhamma. So today, I must also thank everyone for their presence, and I will invite Bhante to first deliver the 5 precepts and thereafter to commence the Dhamma talk. So.
Okay.
Namo.
Thank you so very much, Professor Lakshman. Let us begin by reciting the Namo Tassa together.
Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato
Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. Dutiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami. Tatiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. Panatipata Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. Adinadana Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. Kamesu michachara veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Musavada veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Surameraya majjapamadatthana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Imani panchasikhapadani silena sugating yanti silena bhoga sampada silena nibhuting yanti tasma silang visodhaye. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, very good. Lakshman, sorry, just before we go on, just remind me, what time are we aiming to finish up this evening?
So we start at 3. We have left 1.5 hours. That's 90
Okay.
minutes, 3 to 4:30. So Bhante can speak for about 50, 60 minutes, and we have a Q&A, and then
Okay,
closing.
no problems. No problems. Thank you. Okay, excellent. So thank you so much to Professor Lakshman and the International Dhamma Program for inviting me to come and speak once more. I am very honoured to join you and to share the Dhamma with you on this auspicious full moon day. And I hope that you've all had a wonderful day so far and that you will continue to do so. And the Dhamma is something which is part of our lives, hopefully every day, but especially on these days of the full moon. And this practice of observing the Poya day is one of the noble practices of the Dhamma that goes all the way back to the time of the Buddha. Sorry, just messing around with the thing here. Okay, so sorry.
Do you want to share anything?
No, I was just wondering if we could ask the panelists, because most of the panelists, I can't see them. And so I feel like I'm just talking to myself, really.
Yeah, if they can
see
open...
Sumana and Lakshman, I can see. The rest of the panelists, I can't see. So I kind of feel a bit lonely. I feel always a bit odd talking about Dhamma to myself. And so anyway, if we can
Bhante,
do that.
excuse me, Bhante, I'm not going to be able to, I'm not going to be able to come on. I'll listen to you. Yeah.
I understand, Deepika, that's fine.
Thank you, Bhante.
If possible to come on, then that would be good.
Thank you.
But it's good to know that you're there anyway. Yeah.
Others can unmute if they wish to.
Yeah. All right. So look, yes. So the topic tonight is karma and the both the inner and outer dimensions of karma. Okay. So let me approach this topic slowly, because karma is a topic that we know a lot about, probably. And the things that we know about are usually the things that we need to actually learn, because the things that we don't know about are the things that we want to learn. The things that we do know about are things we think we don't have to learn. So that's where the problem is, right? Because we think that we know. So let's take it slowly and gradually sort of work our way up to this topic a little bit. So the root of the word karma, of course, is the word kar, to do, and it's a very common root. In fact, the second most common root, verbal root in Pali, it's the most common word bu, to be, and kara, to do, is the second most common root. So it's a very ordinary word. So this is the first thing to note. So the word karma is just an ordinary word. And if you're going to say, for example, I'm going to go off and go to work today, then you would say, I'm going to go off and do some karma today. And it's just like an ordinary word that you use in language in all kinds of different ways that has no kind of special meaning. And because it means those the actions or what we're doing, right, is an active word, right? Being is more static, doing is more active, right? And so it invites us to consider, in what sense are we doing? Like, what kinds of actions are we talking about? Now, a very common sense of the word karma, as well as being used to just mean work. So, you know, sowing the fields could be kind of karma, or building a house would be a kind of karma. But it also came to have the sense of a ritual. And so this is one of the senses that it's used in the Vedic context, so the pre-Buddhist religious context. So people would, a karma would be a kind of a ritual or a rite. And so you would do your karma. In fact, we still preserve that sense in the Vinaya, because in the Vinaya, when this Buddhist monastic code of conduct, when we talk about doing an act of the Sangha, same as if you would have an act of parliament, right? The act of the Sangha is the Sangha Kamma. So it's an act of the Sangha. So it's where the Sangha, the community, comes together and we decide we're going to do something. And so typically the act of the Sangha might be a legal procedure of some kind. For example, we might say appoint a Sangha officer to take responsibility for looking after, say, the accommodation and the guests in the community. So we would use a Sangha Kamma to appoint that person. And so we as a group are then performing that action. And we have like a kind of a liturgy and a form that we use that can be used to follow that procedure. So this is another sense. Now, of course, in that sense of a karma is quite different from the Vedic sense of karma as a ritual. I mean, in a way, they both have a ritualistic sense to them. But in the Vedic sense of karma, then you're performing some acts and saying some words which are going to invoke the gods, are going to invoke the divinity, that you're going to ask for blessings or something like that. So in a way, it has a kind of almost like a magical or spiritual power that is said to be invoked when you do these rituals. Whereas in the Buddhist sense of a Sangha Kamma, it doesn't really have that sense. It's just like a formal legal proceeding that has a certain kind of outcome, just like a secular proceeding might have in a committee or a parliament or something like that. So this is kind of another sense of karma. Now, when the Vedic practitioners, that is the pre-Buddhist Vedic practitioners, and just FYI, when I'm using, notice the way that I'm using the terminology here. I say the Vedic practitioners rather than the Hindu practitioners. And this is a kind of a historical kind of thing. But the Vedic religion is obviously the ancestor of what today we call Hinduism. But there are very many aspects of modern Hinduism which were not present at all in the Vedic culture at the time of the Buddha or the pre-Buddhist time. So historians usually to make that distinction by talking about the Vedic culture rather than the Hindu culture at the time, which sort of brings in a lot of assumptions that aren't necessarily valid for that period of time. But it's certainly true that for that period of time that they would perform rituals. Usually the ritual would be the Agnihotra, make offering of ghee to the fire, or they would have the soma ritual where they would press the soma, make this kind of milky substance which they would drink, which evidently made them high or something like that. And then they would sing songs and hymns to their gods and so on, to bring them blessings, to bring them prosperity. Sometimes they would be to defeat their enemies or to exorcise demons or to ensure a good pregnancy or an abundant harvest, and so on and so forth. And so these kinds of karmas were being done. Now, as time went on, the requirements for doing those kinds of karmas became more and more strict. You had to do them like at the right time. You had to arrange the altar in the right way. You had to say the right words. You had to have the right actions. And you had multiple different specialities within the Vedic priesthood who would ensure that everything was going okay. Now, once you get to that kind of point, then it does kind of raise the question, like, well, what happens if it doesn't quite go right? So if the priest is saying the hymn, but if they get one of the words wrong, what happens then? Does it still work, right? And this, of course, on the one hand, becomes a requirement to do it as well as possible. And on the other hand, it becomes a kind of a convenient excuse, right? So if you do a karma for, let's say, a safe pregnancy, and then if the woman has a miscarriage, then you can say, oh, well, it must have been that the priest didn't recite it right, or they didn't do the ritual right or something. And so you've got a kind of an excuse for not getting it right. So these are some of the ways that this idea of karma evolved before the Buddha. So some people, before the Buddha came along, would say, like, what happens if, like, let's say you have to use a certain kind of wood to perform this ritual, or you have to do it at a certain time of year, but for some reason that's not possible. What happens if you need to have a certain kind of priest to do it, but that priest isn't there? Like, what happens then? And the answer became, well, you can do it by faith. So there were at least some people before the time of the Buddha who argued that you don't actually have to really do the ritual as such. You can kind of do the ritual by faith, right? You can do it as long as you believe it enough, and then it's still going to be just as good. Now, of course, this kind of idea is very common these days. And you find that, I think, in all different religions, and they'll find that, and I certainly know a lot of Christians who I know will be like, okay, you don't have to go to the church to pray. And fair enough. I remember years ago, because I grew up as a Catholic, I remember years ago the priest saying, people say you don't have to go to the church to pray, which is true, but do they? Or do they stay at home and not pray and just watch telly instead? So it's easy to make those kinds of excuses. And of course, in Buddhism, we can make that same kind of excuse, right? So we can say, oh, well, you can still, I can keep my precepts. I don't have to recite the words of keeping precepts. Very true, right? You don't have to recite the words, right? We just did. So that reciting the words in a way is a karma, right? In that external sense. But you don't have to do that. And if you want to just, keep the precepts for yourself, that's fine. But why do we recite it? We recite it in order to support each other. Because when we recite those precepts as a community, we don't just make that undertaking ourselves, right? It's not just our inner karma, but it's also a social event. And as a social event, it then affirms a certain set of values that we hold as a Buddhist community, and that we support each other as a Buddhist community, right? It's not just your personal thing. And I think this is kind of, this is a complex or a difficult dynamic in the world that we live today, because we do live in a world where things are changing very, very rapidly. We live in a world where people become very divided. People here are listening to the Dhamma talk individually in your home, most of you by yourself. Maybe there's 2 or 3 people listening, but it's a very different experience than if you were listening to a Dhamma talk in a temple with a group of, how many people, 134 participants in a room, and everybody quiet. You see, even the quietness is important, because if we're listening to Dhamma in a room, everyone, there's a kind of social expectation that we're all going to be quiet, and you're not going to be taking a call and just chatting to somebody on your phone, or nudging somebody and making a comment or something, right? And so we help to support each other so that we can pay attention and listen better. So we live in a world where everything's become fractured, and our shared reality and our shared values are under threat because of that. And I think this is something for us as religious practitioners that is really important to bear in mind, because the Dhamma has a powerful role in building communities and in bringing people together. And bringing people together, there are many ways of bringing people together. Cricket brings people together, that's fine, but Dhamma brings people together to call out our highest values and to call us out to be something better, right? Right? There are ways of being together. That's, you can go down to the local pub and drink with people. There's a togetherness there, but you're calling out those lower values. We are bringing together to call out each other's highest values. And so this is one of the purposes of doing a karma or ritual or a service that we would perform together as Buddhist practitioners. Now, for a long time, the expression of this karma in different ways was recognized. And in Buddhism, we are very familiar with the idea of acts which are performed by body, speech, and mind. So we always have that threefold division, body, speech, and mind. We also find the same threefold division in the Vedic traditions. We find the same threefold division in the Jaina tradition, and we find even that same threefold division in the Zoroastrian tradition, which is if you like, the Persian branch of the old Indo-European religion. So just a bit of background, the Vedic religion arrived in India and branched off, and one branch went to Persia, where it formed into what's called Zoroastrianism, or the Parsis they're called these days. And that religion has a lot in common with the old Vedic religion. And you have like devas and asuras and these kinds of things which are familiar to Buddhists as well. So they also speak of actions of body, speech, and mind. And that shows that this kind of concept is very old, it's very fundamental. And it shows that people have been thinking and talking about this for a long, long time. And it's interesting, right? Because it's telling us that even thousands of years ago, people were distinguishing between acts that are done by the body and acts that are done by the mind and acts that are done by speech. And then that has all kinds of ramifications. For example, what happens if you commit a crime, right? So if you take something, did you have the intention to steal that thing? Right? And so that intention, is this an act of body, which might have just been an accident? I'm sorry, Your Honor, I just happened to put it in my bag and I forgot it was there, right? So this is just an action of body, and it might not have a moral connotation. But then what is the mind, the mental state that goes along with that? So this division of karma into body, speech, and mind allows us to understand our actions in a moral context, to distinguish between intentional actions and unintentional actions. And this kind of distinction is found in the Vinaya, in the monk's discipline, all the time. And we constantly find that the Vinaya will be analyzing like the factors of an offense. Some kinds of transgressions require a mental component. So again, just to think of that example like of stealing, right? So for a monk or a nun to be guilty of stealing, of theft, then it requires us to have a teya chitta, right? The mind of a thief, right? So we have to actually be thinking, oh, we're stealing this. This is very important because you might be in a monastery. This happened the other day. I'm staying here with my friend, Venerable Jagoro, and I was missing my robe, and I picked up a robe. I took it into my room, and then a few minutes later, he's like, hey, where's my robe? And I'm like, oh, hang on. So I took his robe by accident, right? And if you're wondering if monks, because all our robes look the same, if you're wondering whether we ever get them mixed up, then the answer is yes. Yes, we do, if we're being careless, which obviously I was at that time. So in that case, according to the Vinaya, then there's no issue because it wasn't intentional, right? It was just purely an action of body, but there was no intention to steal. But there are other cases where an offense still does not actually require intention. So an example of that would be, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the monastic rule that we're only supposed to eat before the noon, right? So at noontime, we're supposed to stop eating. And of course, it's always a bit, there can be different situations where you're not quite sure what the time is, or it's a bit unclear exactly what the time is and so on. And so you can end up eating after noon. And in that case, intention is not a factor. So if you get the time wrong and you're eating after noon, let's say I didn't realize that daylight saving came to an end. And I think, oh, it's a daylight saving. I can eat till 12:30 because it's daylight saving. And then daylight saving ends and I didn't realize it, well, I'm still guilty of an offense. So it tends to be more minor things like that that don't require intention. Usually things that are important will require intention. So my point here is simply that from a Buddhist point of view, we're able to distinguish between acts of body, acts of speech, and acts of mind, and the moral weight with which those acts are considered depends on the intention or lack of intention with those acts, okay? Which tends to then move towards the idea that intention is key to what karma is, right? And so we move from karma being just physical actions and material actions to acknowledging that there's body, speech, and mind, then to acknowledge that actually the mind or the intention there is an important part of that. And then you can sort of move to a point where actually the intentionality of the action is actually the key to what the karma is. And so there we come to the properly Buddhist philosophical idea of karma, which is that Cetanahang bhikkhave kammang vadami, is intention that I call action, right? And so you can see that idea that the Buddha was talking about actually comes from a long cultural and historical context. There's a long story behind it. And the Buddha is pointing to something very important. Of course, the Buddha is not saying that it's only intention that matters, okay? Just so we're clear, I don't want to be held responsible. You can call up your boss tomorrow and say, but Bhante Sujato said the intention is all that matters. So I had the intention to finish that work. And the fact that it isn't actually finished, that's just the actions of body that weren't done. But in my heart, it was definitely that intention to finish it, right? So no, this is not what I'm saying, and it's not what the Buddha is saying. So please don't use that excuse, right? Okay, you will get in trouble, right? So, but in terms of karma, intention is the most important aspect, which determines the moral quality of an act. Of course, this is what the Buddha is concerned about. You know, it's interesting that these days we tend to judge people like to judge with people whether they're efficient, whether they are hardworking, and all of these things. And these are things which weren't necessarily so important to the Buddha. And you know, I think we should spare some thoughts for lazy people, for people who are inefficient and not very good at getting the work done, mainly because that's what I'm like. And I feel compassion for all the people out there. And everyone's going to get very judged, like you're very judged. Are you doing your work efficiently and those kinds of things? But to be honest, you know, it's nice to be around people who are kind of relaxed about things and who are willing to spend a bit of time to have a joke and to get to know you. And the kind of life isn't always about just getting things done, you know? And it's actually about living and connecting with people and sharing some time with people. So I don't know. I think it's good. It's good to be a hard worker and it's good to do those things, but a bit of balance, right? A bit of balance is important. So when we talk about the intentionality of actions, last weekend I went for house dana with some of our local Buddhist devotees in Sydney, who are from the Ambedkarite community. So these are the former Dalits mostly from Maharashtra, and following the leadership of the great Dr. Ambedkar, they converted to Buddhism in the late 50s, and since then have established their Buddhist communities. And of course, they have very specific historical circumstances. Right? They've been discriminated against for centuries, and their people have been regarded as outcasts, regarded as untouchables, and so on, and deprived of any opportunities, deprived of any education or housing or anything like that. And it's really interesting to see that community, right? And now after a few generations, here we are, and I'm talking to them in their new house in the suburbs of Sydney, where they work as in IT or doing something like that, and they're raising their families and so on. And why are they able to do that, right? They're able to do it because of the Dhamma, because the Buddha told them right? Via Dr. Ambedkar, the Buddha told them that you are valuable and what you do and your life is worthwhile. And my friend Venerable Yeshe explained this to me one time. She said that she runs a center there, Bodhicitta Center in Maharashtra. And she said the thing that you have to understand is that it's not that people lack education or lack housing or lack food. Yes, all of those things are bad. But the thing that's really bad is that God told them that that's how it has to be. God wants it to be that way. God wants them to have nothing. And if they have something, then there's something wrong with the world. And that is what is really oppressive and really hard for people to overcome. So when they encountered Buddhism and they converted to Buddhism, they started to believe in themselves. They started to believe that they could change, and they have. And the social development, health development, education development, all of those things has been really stunning for the Ambedkarite community. A long way to go, of course, right? A long way to go. But still, there's an incredible change there. And one of the reasons why I mentioned that community in this context, we talked about this on the weekend, because Dr. Ambedkar very much emphasized karma in terms of an active working. And so you'll see that the Buddha that they prefer is like a walking Buddha, right? The Buddha who's actually doing things. And you can see that from their particular historical circumstances, this is what they needed to encourage. And so they are very kind of focused on like a practical application of Dhamma in order to lift themselves up, to lift their families and lift their communities up, and to create prosperity, create health and well-being as a foundation for their Dhamma practice. So this is a way, if you like, of emphasizing that intentional action through the body, right, which is going to lift up the Dhamma and to embody that one particular kind of Dhamma practice in that way. For many of us, when we hear the Buddha say, we're talking about intentionality, of course, we often think about the mind. We think about meditation. Of course, meditation also is very important. But before I go on to talk about meditation as such, I want to talk about the second one, the body, speech, and mind, which is the speech. Also very important. And here I am as a Buddhist monk and giving a Dhamma talk, using my speech to communicate to you, hopefully using right speech to communicate. And I'm trying to bear in mind those qualities and those properties of right speech that are important, that in order to make my speech karma, my vachi karma, as good as possible. And so that includes obviously telling the truth, right? That's taken for the most obvious one, but also speaking meaningfully. Yeah? Speaking meaningfully. Actually, just on the truth one, I was very happy to see that in Wales, they're actually making a proposal in the parliament that politicians have to tell the truth. They're going to make it law that politicians have to tell the truth, and if they're not, they're going to be subject to criminal proceedings, which I think is excellent. I have long believed that is the case. Personally, I think that any elected official should be considered to be as if under oath, and they should be guilty of perjury if they lie while they're in their office. This is what I believe. So speech is very important. The more that we lie, we create a world of delusion around ourselves. And lying has become just massive in the world we live in today. It's astonishing and honestly to me, very distressing and upsetting to see that we have more than ever the capacity to find the truth. We have better information than ever, better resources, better learning, all of those things. And yet, our world is awash with floods and floods and floods of disinformation, of lies, of delusion, of just false speech of all kinds, and not just things that are untrue, but things that are just hateful and divisive and horrible. And it's just terrible. And it's the same everywhere in the world, this problem. And I think it's really important that as Buddhists and as spiritual practitioners, that we try our best to stand up against this and try our best. Everybody else may be lying, but you speak the truth. Be careful, okay? Don't share things, stories or memes or information without checking it first. Okay, this is really basic. Yeah, somebody sends you something, check it. Usually it's not too hard to check it. Okay, make sure you only share things that are true. Make sure that you share things you think, well, is this good? Is this like standing up for what is right? Is this standing up to help those people who need help? Is this standing up to protect the truth and what's really valuable in the world? Or is this just like repeating some kind of, because there's a lot of these kinds of disinformation, people like spreading conspiracy theories, spreading lies, spreading falsehoods, which kind of get a hook into your mind, and they become something that becomes like a story that you spin, and that so many people spin, and you think that it's something that you're thinking, but it's actually a thought that somebody has planted in you, right? This happens all the time, and do not think that you are exempt from this. You are absolutely not exempt for this. And the way that we get around this is we check our sources, we find out who's reliable, and we use our rationality. We use our critical ability to reflect and to inquire and to make sure that we are careful and circumspect in how we speak. Now, having said all that, it's also important that we don't not speak. I mean, sometimes, yes, we can not speak, right? If you're listening to a Dhamma talk, that's a good time to not speak. But there is also important for us to speak, especially as a Buddhist community. Buddhists don't speak enough. And we need to be out there articulating a Buddhist value and a Buddhist point of view. And I'll just tell you one story about this. When I was recently in England, I was in Oxford, and I happened to have the great fortune to meet the Buddhist scholar Richard Gombrich, who was Venerable Sumana knows from Dr. Sumana knows from his time in Oxford. And Richard is very old now; he's 86 or something like that, but still very bright and very sharp. And we had a couple of hours talking, and it was really interesting, actually. And we got to talk. He was actually very pleased to see that I was continuing his work with doing research into Vedic backgrounds and things like that. But anyway, one thing that he brought up, he said that he's been listening to a lot of the war in Gaza and listening to different people with their different perspectives. And he said that, he was disappointed that even though he'd listened to so many different perspectives, he'd never heard a Buddhist perspective. And he didn't even really mean like a representative from a Buddhist community. That wasn't the issue. The issue was whether the Buddhist values were not being represented in the public sphere. Right? And so the Buddhist value would be, well, just because somebody hurts you, that doesn't mean you have to hurt them back. And this is a very kind of basic point that he was making, that there's actually so much suffering that can be avoided if we consider that maybe we don't fight, maybe we don't have to hurt them because they hurt us. Maybe we can respond with love, and maybe if we had forgiveness, then we could have a start to being able to resolve these conflicts. And that was a very insightful point, I think, that Richard made, and something that I've really tried to take to heart, and I've really tried to emphasize this with people, as much as possible. That to think about when there are conflicts, when there are issues, when there are things of importance, to really just reflect on it from a Buddhist point of view and say, well, what is a Dhammic point of view on this? What is a Buddhist point of view? And then to articulate that point of view. Not that you're necessarily going to have all the answers or anything like that, but just to be able to say, well, from a point of view of Buddhist values, then maybe we could look at it like this. And to bear in mind those fundamental Buddhist values of metta, caring for each other, not harming, not violence, and all of those things. So to be able to promote and uplift those kinds of perspectives, I think, is also a very important part of our karma. Another important part of karma, and I won't dwell on it too long, but another important part of karma is also to speak clearly. And this is something that I've been noticing a lot with the Buddhist, with the Buddha's words in the suttas. The Buddha spoke very clearly. And he did that, I believe, as a deliberate reaction to the Vedic culture in which he found himself. And the Vedic texts, Vedic poetry, the Vedic rituals, texts, and so on, are very obscure, deliberately so. And they were always trying to hide their meaning. I mean, from a literary point of view, they're very intriguing because they're always playing with words and playing with meanings, and nothing ever quite means what it looks like. And so from a literary point of view, it's very interesting. But it's also very hard to figure out exactly what it is they're saying. But the Buddha spoke very clearly. Idang dukkham, this is suffering. Yes, it's very straightforward. This is the origin of suffering. This is the ending of suffering. This is a way of practice that leads to the ending of suffering. And so he wanted to express himself in a way that would be clear and easy to understand. And this is an act of compassion for those people who are making the effort to listen to what you have to say. Yeah? Whenever we speak, if we are speaking to someone, that person or those people is making an effort. They have shown up. They are wanting to hear. So out of respect for them, we articulate ourselves clearly. We say what we mean. And we do our best to be able to convey what's said as clearly and as articulately as possible. Okay, so that's a bit about the karma of right speech. And then lastly, purely the mental karma. So purely the mental karma, then obviously we're talking about our thoughts, right? You can, maybe you're not doing anything unwholesome with your body or doing anything unwholesome with your speech, but if your mind is consumed with unwholesome thoughts, then you're still making bad karma. Now, I want to make a few points about this. First thing is that when we talk about karma in this particular kind of sense, right, we are really talking about some kind of deliberate action, okay? It's not just a stray thought that you have, all right? The stray thought doesn't really have any karmic weight to it, yeah? And I mean, it maybe has a little bit, right? But it's nothing that's really strong. If you look in the Buddhist texts at the examples of karma that led to rebirth, it's always when somebody made an offering, or if they renounced, or if they meditated, or if they something like that. So you actually do something significant that's going to create that karma, right? Or the same thing with bad karma. Maybe you steal something or something like that. But just like a stray thought is just kind of a bit like background noise, right? It's just there's so many stray thoughts that are just here and there. They kind of balance themselves out. And it's a bit like a kind of cosmic background radiation. It's just kind of buzzing in the way in the background a little bit. So don't worry too much about those stray thoughts, which sometimes people worry about. So the Buddha addressed this when he spoke to his cousin Mahanama, who came to him and said, Bhante, sometimes I'm walking along, I trip over. And when I trip over, I lose my mindfulness. And then I worry, oh, what happens if I die now? Am I going to go somewhere bad because I've died without mindfulness? And the Buddha said, Ma bhai Mahanama, ma bhai Mahanama. Do not fear Mahanama, do not fear Mahanama. How can it be that somebody like yourself, who has kept the precepts for such a long time, who's practiced for such a long time, and who has such strong faith in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, should go to a good, bad destiny after death? It's not possible. It cannot happen. So don't worry too much about those stray thoughts and these kinds of things. What matters is how you develop your heart in the long term, right? What is your intention? And that's what will carry you through. At a more refined level, even than thoughts, of course, is meditation. So we can sit in meditation. There, we try to not only purify our thoughts so that we let go of thoughts associated with greed, hatred, and delusion, but we also try to let go even of those good thoughts. So the Buddha talked about this in the Dvaita Vitaka Sutta, in the Majjhima Nikaya, about having to let go, learning to let go of both, first of all, letting go of the bad thoughts and developing the good thoughts, and then being able to let go even of those good thoughts to be able to go into deep states of samadhi. So this is that process that meditation goes on. And of course, at a profound level in Dhamma practice, we can let go of any kind of karma at all. So when the mind goes into a deep state of samadhi, like into a state of jhana, then at that point, there's no kind of active like willfulness or thinking or anything like that. The mind is very still, it's very focused, and it's basically set in a particular way. But the intentionality is still kind of fixed as part of that mental constellation. So that state of mind still includes that cetana or that intention. And that creates the rebirth which is associated with that, namely the rebirth in the Brahmaram, which is very powerful. And the Buddha said will overcome any other kind of karma which you may have done. That's how powerful the karma of a jhana is. So this brings us on to then that topic of the karma as it manifests in rebirth. Now, in India today, and for a long time, there are really three main religions: Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism. There's many other religions, of course, in India as well, but these are the three kind of old Indian religious traditions. And all three of those religions believe in karma, and they believe in rebirth. And they have similar teachings about karma and rebirth as well, right? You do good deeds, you get reborn in a good place. You do bad deeds, you get reborn in a bad place. And they also, all three of those religions also teach that ultimately our aim is to let go of karma completely and find liberation. So the way that we think about that liberation, the way we conceive that liberation is different. It's different in Hinduism and Jainism and Buddhism, but we share that idea that there is like a liberation from this round of karma. So this is, I think, is an interesting sort of commonality that's shared among all three of these dharmic religions. And somehow it comes back to the idea that you can't get an infinite result from a finite action, right? If we come back to the roots of the word karma, right? Let's say our karma is to sow the field. And we can spend all this time preparing the field and getting all the weeds out and sowing it and so on, and then harvesting it, threshing it, preparing it, and then we can eat the rice that we have grown from that field. And so we're getting the fruits of that karma. But that pot of rice is going to come to an end. And no matter how fertile the field is, and no matter how well you've tended it, it's going to have a finite result. And then you're going to be hungry again. And you're going to have to start again. And so this is that idea that karma somehow is limited and it's going to come to an end. And so people started to think about what there might be as a way of something that's outside of this. Now, even though, and I just want to make a point just as a historical point, even though we think of like Indian religions as sharing this complex of ideas, which is true, it's not necessarily the case that that was also true in the time of the Buddha. In the time of the Buddha, there were many different religious and ascetics and philosophers who taught many different kinds of things, some of which believed in these teachings on karma and rebirth, and some of which did not. Some people rejected it completely, said there's no such thing. There's no, you just live this life, and then when this life is gone, the four elements disperse, and then you go back to nothing. Other people would say that yes, there is such a thing as rebirth, but it's nothing to do with how you live. It's just destiny. So you just take your rebirth as is destined. Or other people would say some of the Upanishadic views on rebirth, they had like a kind of almost like a physical view of rebirth, like you would actually get like your soul would get wafted up in the smoke of your funeral fire and then go to the moon. And then from the moon, then your soul would return in the dew to the earth and then come back to the earth. And there's almost like this kind of physical process of rebirth that was happening. So point being that there were many different ideas about what rebirth was, whether it was real or whether it was not real. And so even though today it looks like everybody in India agrees that rebirth is real, that was not the case at the time of the Buddha. Of course, even today, that's not really the case, right? That's just the main religions that believe that. But India is nothing if not diverse and contradictory, as always. But anyway, this is my main point. So the Buddha was very clear on this point. And he said quite explicitly, I do not teach these teachings on karma and rebirth because I have learned it from some other ascetic or Brahmin. I teach it because I have known and seen it for myself. And this is a fundamental part of the Buddha's teaching, which he repeated again and again and again. Part of the Tevijja, for example, is the threefold knowledges, where the Buddha would see beings being reborn according to their karma. And this is a basic passage repeated many times in the suttas. So clearly, the teachings on karma were very fundamental to the Buddha and to the way that he conceived his path of practice. Okay. So we have the teaching on karma, we have acts through body, speech, and mind. We remember that what matters is karma that has a moral value and a moral force to it. We're not worried too much about random or incidental thoughts and so on. I mean, you try your best, right? But it's not gonna have too much of an effect. Your main thing is those things that you choose to do and that you make a deliberate choice to do. And that karma can be refined through the different ways that we practice. And so the Buddha has said that the karma of giving is very good, and he always praised giving, but the karma of keeping precepts is even better. The karma of meditating is even better still. The best kind of karma, of course, is liberation, which is the ending of all karma. And that's the true aim of the Buddha's path. So when somebody is freed, and I'm speaking now of an arahant or a perfected one or a worthy one, then they still have intention, right? They still intend to do things, and they still do acts by body, speech, and mind. But because they have let go of any underlying conceit, any underlying sense of self, any underlying attachment to those deeds or to the result of those deeds, then they do those acts completely in a way that is completely free. Completely free. Free of good results and free of bad results. Of course, they can only do good things, right? They're not like, and this is something which is a kind of a terrible perversion of Buddhism or spiritual life these days. That some people think that you can go beyond good and evil, which means you can just do whatever you want and you can do bad things, but it's not really bad because you're really freed from it. It's nonsense. It's not what the Buddhists taught. The Buddha taught that when you are liberated, that you cannot do those things that are bad and those things that are going to be harmful. You can only do those things that are good. So this is that sense of freedom. So somebody who practices can let go, and they reach that state where their acts are all motivated purely by the Dhamma and purely in line with the Dhamma. Now, so far I've been talking about the exercise of karma primarily through a particular individual. But if you remember at the beginning, I talked also about like the Sangha karma and how a group can perform a karma together. And so this is something I want to return to again, because this is a little bit subtle. Now, in a technical sense, right, a group can't perform the same karma, okay? Karma is karma sakomhi, right? Karma belongs to you, and it is your act. And so this means that you yourself are responsible for what happens. So this is both good and bad, okay? It's nice to be able to blame other people. And it would be terrific if we could say that, oh, they're the problem, the government's the problem, our family's the problem, the neighbor's the problem, the boss is the problem. But no, you have to look after yourself. And it doesn't mean I think is important to notice. The Buddha was not trying to say that you don't worry about those other things. He wasn't saying don't worry about justice. He wasn't saying don't worry about fairness. He wasn't saying don't worry about looking after people. Of course you should do that, because that's your good karma. It's your good karma to look after others, to care about others, and to try to help them. Yeah? But that's all you can do. And what they do with that is also up to them. So we can help, and we should, and we must, and do what we can to help others around us, but how they respond is then their karma. So if you consider that question of like a group karma, because this is something that people ask about a lot, like if you think of like, say, the example of the Sangha karma that I mentioned, like in that case, you have like a formal act where you have come together in order to make that act. And one of the characteristics of a Sangha karma is that it has to be done in consensus, right? If you it's a bit like, you know, you have a wedding, and if someone says, does anybody object? And then you say, no, they shouldn't be married. And then, well, that's a big problem for everyone. But if that happens in a Sangha karma, then if one monk or one nun disagrees, then that Sangha karma cannot go ahead. Right? And you have to find some way of resolving that conflict before. And so you make sure that everybody is on that same page, right? But you can see that kind of even so, you know, there's still going to be an actual like difference in karma in people's minds, right? I mean, let's say I mentioned the example, you're appointing a Sangha officer, right? That's to look after the residences in the monastery. Right? You do a Sangha karma together. So the community does that act. And because you do that act in accordance with Dhamma and Vinaya, because you do that act legitimately, and because you do that act with everybody present, then it's a valid act, and it's a good thing to do. It's good karma. But one of those monks is sitting there thinking, I wish I could be the one to appoint those buildings. Then I could give myself the best kuti, and I could make sure that he doesn't get the best kuti because I don't like him, right? So if you're doing the Sangha karma while you're thinking like that, then obviously your individual karma, not so good, right? Room for improvement there. Whereas if you're doing your Sangha karma while thinking, sadhu, 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 it's wonderful that that good person has been appointed to this role. I'm sure they'll do a great role and be able to help people to stay in the monastery, because when they stay in the monastery, they can practice the Dhamma and find liberation. So sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And if you're thinking like that, well, obviously that's another kind of karma, which is a better one, right? So in that case, even though you're actually all together, you're all doing a group karma, right? But your individual karmas can still be different at that time, right? So this is something which is important to bear in mind. And those individual karmas is the technical kind of karma that we mean when the Buddha was talking about like what's determining your rebirth and so on. So people often think that that the Buddha said that everything is caused by karmas. Not true. You could say that everything involves karma. This is true, right? So the fact that we've been reborn is to do with karma, right? We get reborn in a particular place. But, you know, think about it. We are all here joining together in the Dhamma this evening or this afternoon on Zoom, right? Is that because of our karma? Did we all just happen to do Zoom karma in our past life that has given us this opportunity? No, of course not. It's because of technology, it's because of development, it's because of science, engineering, and the good folk by the way, may I just a bit of a shout out to the good folks at Zoom who have kept this free service going for us for so long. I'm not sure if you're doing a paid tier, but for many people, being using a free service for so long kept the world connected during COVID. And it was not easy for all the poor engineers at Zoom, right? They were running their little startup, and then all of a sudden COVID happens and the entire world is running on their platform. So they did a lot of work to keep us connected in those days. So that was their good karma, actually, right? Because they created something that's worthwhile and useful, and so they did a good karma. That's their right livelihood to be able to make that available for people, and we get to benefit from that. So no, it isn't the case that our karma has created this technology. So that idea of collective karma is has to be considered very carefully. Okay, so we have something similar to that collective karma when we do, for example, an election, right? Because when we have an election, we all go to the poll booth and we vote, and we choose a particular politician or particular party, and we vote for that party, and we have responsibility for that, right? But of course, I mean, it's a shared responsibility, isn't it? I mean, it's difficult to say how much responsibility we have exactly, because sometimes you vote for somebody because they're the least bad option, or sometimes you vote for someone because someone told you to, or sometimes you vote for somebody because, I don't know, maybe you just randomly put their name. Could be many different reasons. But one thing that I want to highlight here, when I hear people talking about this, and I think this is very common around the world, people talk, you know, I think we're very lucky personally. I think we're very lucky to live in a democracy, and I think that that people have fought and died for centuries so that we would have democracies. And as you are all painfully aware, Sri Lanka was a colonial nation until, what is it now, 70 years ago, 70, 80 years since a colonial nation, something like that, and didn't have any say in how your own country was run, right? Now you have a say in how your country is run, and that's a responsibility. And look, running countries is not easy. And as human beings, we are not very good at it. And we frequently get things very badly wrong. It's true. And that's the case all around the world. But we can try to do better. So one of the things that I often hear when people are talking about that, people will be saying something like, oh, yes, we have to appeal to middle-class voters by giving them a tax cut. Or we'll have to be appealing to rural voters by giving subsidies for fertilizers or something like that. And so like, politics seems to revolve around this idea that people are only going to vote because it's good for them, some kind of selfish interest. And personally, I find this a bit disappointing. Obviously, I know, obviously a lot of people do vote purely for selfish interest. Fine, okay, sure. But it's also true that most people actually have a sense of morality. Most people care about others. If your assumption is that the average voter only cares about themselves, you know who only cares about themselves? Psychopaths. Right? Psychopaths only care about themselves and have no compassion for others. And if your political ideology is that voters are psychopaths, I don't know. I feel that is uncomfortable. And I feel that we should be in a public sphere and in a civic sphere, we should be acknowledging the fact that people are, by and large, moral and good and want to help others. And they don't only make decisions from their own selfish points of view. Yeah. I'm not saying that they don't include that point of view. Of course they do, and they should, right? Of course you should consider your own point of view if you're making those decisions, but you should also consider the points of view of others. And you should consider what is right for other people, and not just consider, is this politician going to do this for me? Ask yourself, what are they going to do for the nation? What are they going to do for the vulnerable? What are they going to do for the poor? What are they going to do for the disadvantaged? What are they going to do for the environment? Right? And you can ask yourself, how are they going to be helping people around us? And just bear in mind that democracy and our ability to make a choice and to manifest that choice in the world is a rare and precious thing. And it is hard won and easily lost. And if we don't protect it and value it and cherish it, we are going to learn what it's like to not have it, because it will be taken from us little bit by little bit. So this is, I think, something that's important for us to reflect on as adults, as Buddhists, right? As people who are making mature and responsible choices. that this is important for us to do as part of our spiritual practice. And so this comes a bit to what I was saying before, that Buddhists don't speak enough. And I think that, for Buddhists to speak doesn't mean that we want to drown everybody out. It doesn't mean that we say that we're always right or anything like that. But it does mean to say that we have some confidence in our values, right? And it's not just about saying Buddhism is right, other people are wrong. It's about saying that Buddhism teaches us values, and those values are worthwhile for everyone. And this is fundamental. So if you look at the great Buddhist leader, King Ashoka, then that was one of his geniuses. Right? King Ashoka, in his edicts, rarely spoke about Buddhism. Mostly he would speak about Dharma. Again and again, he spoke about Dharma. Why? Because Dharma, that was something that everybody could share. And if he spoke about Dharma, he would speak about simple moral values of non-harming, of honesty, of kindness, of caring for each other. These are things that everybody can relate to, whether you're Buddhist or from another religion, doesn't matter. Right? Everybody values those things. So we should be trying to emphasize, how can we live as Buddhists with that intentionality to create a world where people are not harming each other, creating a world where truth is normal and is not swamped by lies all the time, right? Creating a world where it's considered to be normal to be kind and to trust each other and to look out for each other and to be grateful. I just wanted to finish with, I think we've got a few questions there, and so I might come to them in just a minute, but I just want to finish with one brief story. And I may have told this story previously in this session, I can't recall, but anyway, I'll go ahead and tell it anyway. A few years ago, we were in Sri Lanka during the time when the struggle was happening, and there was a lot of difficulties going all across the country. And we were teaching a retreat at Nagananda near Kalania. And one day we came down for the retreat, and all of the workers at the center were all wearing yellow T-shirts. And we asked them, why are you wearing yellow T-shirts? And they said, it's in gratitude to the Australian cricket team. Because here we are going through all of these struggles and all of these difficulties, and everything is so bad and so depressing and so hopeless. But the Aussies came and played cricket with us anyway. And that gave us something to look forward to and something to enjoy, even when things were dark. So out of gratitude to the Aussies, they wore their yellow T-shirts for that day. And as an Australian, I found that very moving. And as a Buddhist as well, I also found that very moving. Yeah? And those things, that humanity, right? That way of expressing humanity is such a powerful thing that we can do together. And so it's not about what we have, and it's not about, the money, and it's not about all of those things, but it's about how human can we be. And those are the things where our intention and our karma will really shine. So, Professor Lakshman, I think we have a little bit of time. Should we go into the questions, or what should we do now?
Thank you very much, Bhante. I think that was, a very simplified version of Dhamma. I think all of us would have understood it, and especially some of the areas that Bhante was speaking on, politics and others. But in general, what you find is that everyone, when something good happens to them, they say it's due to my karma, my past karma. If anything bad happens, then they say the same thing of it's my karma. So can you just comment on that sort of thinking that some of the people have?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's always true, right? It's always true to say that the possibility of experiencing that is due to your karma, right? Because we are born in this world, and we're born in this life, and that gives us certain potential. So there's always karma involved in being able to experience that. But the details of what we're actually experiencing are not always to do with karma, but they are involved with the interaction of many different things. And so Buddhist causality has always had the idea that there are many causes and many effects. And so in the Theravada tradition, we have the idea of the pancha niyama, the five sort of systems of natural law, which includes like the weather and the genetics and so on. And karma is one of those systems. So karma works together with other things. So sometimes Buddhists use karma in the way that other religions people use God, right? Something happened, you say, oh, it's God's will, or you say, inshallah, or something, or you say, oh, it's my karma. I mean, okay, it's just a word that we say to comfort ourselves when the world seems chaotic, right? But that's not really how karma works. It's always better to think about karma in terms of how do you respond to things, right? Something good happens to you, that's great, but how do you respond to it? Do you respond by getting conceited? Oh, I must be a good person or something like that? Or do you respond by saying, hey, I've got this blessing, how can I share it with others, right? Or same thing, anything bad happens, do we respond by bitterness and anger and blaming, or do we respond by patience and acceptance? Maybe we have to respond by looking for help from others, right? See, if something bad happens, think about it, something bad happens, let's say you hurt yourself, and then that's okay, that's not good. But then you ask somebody to help. You're giving that other person an opportunity to do good karma. So you should never be ashamed or backwards about asking for help. Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante. I think Dr. Sumra, do you have any brief question or comment?
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much. And actually, I should let Bhante answer other questions as well, because there are some questions I saw. At the same time, I'm really grateful to Bhante for drawing our attention to our own responsibility in terms of karma and the results. And it's very important that honesty is the background, right, or honesty is what is very important in relation to our work and our way of function. So I mean, Bhante reminds us of all these, into history as well as modern periods, everything in a nutshell. Very simple, very authentic. I think, I mean, I'm very grateful to Bhante for reminding us of karma and our responsibility for what we are going to do and what we do. Thank you very much, Bhante.
Thank you, Dr. Bhante, shall I read the questions, or you can see it, or shall I read?
I can see them. I'll read them. Thanks, Lakshman. Okay, so we have from Indira Fernando. How's it going, Indira? Bhante, can you kindly explain what the Buddha meant in the Kamma Sutta by saying the I is old karma, to be seen as generated and fashioned by volition, as something to be felt? Right. So the point here is that the I is created by some kind of action in a past life, or at least is made possible by actions in a past life. Right. So your I and your body generally obviously is nourished in this life by the food that we eat and the other conditions that keep us alive. But part of that is also the karma from the past life, which has led us to be reborn in this particular place. So this is kind of what I was getting at when I was saying that karma is always involved with these things, right? It always plays a role, because it's part of the reason why we have a capacity to experience anything. Right? Those things which are generated and fashioned by volition, this means that in the past, the karma that we made in the past. So yes, so then from Ranjit. So if your current and future lives are dependent on past karma, right? How can one overcome the bad karmas, notwithstanding leading a religious life in this and future lives? Well, you do it by making as much good karma as possible, and hoping that you make enough good karma so that your bad karma doesn't catch up with you. The Buddha said that it's like karma is like putting salt in water. If you put a teaspoon of salt in a glass of water, it'll taste very salty. But if you put the same salt in a lake, you'll hardly taste it. So the karma doesn't disappear, but if you do a lot of good karma, then the effects of the bad karma will be negligible. Does karma affect non-Buddhists? Yes, of course. So the idea of karma is basically like a natural law, right? So it's like the law of gravity or something like that. It affects everyone. We may or may not be aware of it, but it affects everyone. So, I mean, most religions have an idea that's sort of similar to karma, right? But usually that will also involve like the intervention of God or something like that. But in Buddhism, it's felt to be purely a natural system, right? There's no God or deity or anything that's dealing out these things, but it's just cause and effect. Just like a natural system is working. You know, if you drop something, it falls down, no one's making it fall. That's just how gravity works. All right, from Anonymous. How's it going, Anonymous? I hope you are having a great day. Thank you, Bhante, for a very interesting talk. Oh, well, thank you for saying thank you, because it's very rewarding for me to be teaching the Dhamma. I feel like very blessed as a Dhamma teacher, because I have the opportunity to share the Dhamma with people who actually care about it, and it makes a difference in people's lives. Okay, so why does thought or intention have karmic consequences, especially if not actioned fully? Would merely thinking of an unwholesome action result in bad karmic energy? Why do thoughts have a powerful effect on karma and rebirth? Okay, so yes, thoughts can have an effect even if you don't act them out, right? So, for example, maybe I'm going to be planning a robbery. Okay, I'm going to be planning a heist. How am I going to do that? Steal from that bank. Okay, I'm going to have to wait till they finish. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to have to break into the safe. I'm going to have to do this, and I'm sitting there planning that. So there's an action which is taking shape in my mind, right? And that action is quite developed and reinforced, right? And so that's definitely going to have some karmic consequences. Even if I go along to the bank and then think, no, I shouldn't do that, right? Okay, so it's better, right? But there's still the previous karma that I made that still has an effect. On the other hand, if I'm walking down the street and I think, I wonder if you could rob that bank, then that's not really going to have much of an effect. I mean, maybe a little bit, right? Maybe like a grain of salt in a glass of water or something, but so little that you wouldn't really know it. So don't worry too much about whether stray thoughts are going to be creating those karma. The main thing that you need to worry about is trying to ensure that the way that you use your mind is in a good direction. And if your mind is in a good direction, a few stray thoughts, never mind. Okay, so greetings from Penang. Oh, hi, Joe from Penang. Oh, I'm lovely to hear that you're here. I love Penang, by the way, and I've lived there for quite some time, so really good to have some friends from Penang here. So lately I'm struggling to keep quiet when I hear extremely harsh speech uttered by volunteering Buddhist Sunday school teachers towards the Sunday school students. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry to hear that. Maybe they think it's justified as they're strict teachers, but I'm feeling rather uncomfortable as a volunteer too. I can imagine. Also, I'm educated in New Zealand where teachers are generally quite gentle. I'm glad that has been your experience, right? And anyway, so I feel like the harsh speech almost comes across like bullying, and I've somehow said something to protect the student. Good, congratulations. I'm glad that you stood up on behalf of the students. But it's tiresome to go against a culture, be it inside or outside a Buddhist circle. I understand, yeah, it definitely is. Difficult decision, but I feel like keeping quiet rather than hinting negatively towards the fear-sparking teachers. I'm just a volunteer anyway and do not really want to rock the boat for some of the long-serving volunteers regarding harsh speech. Any comments? Well, look, difficult situation, look, and I'm really sorry that you're having to be in that situation because I know it's difficult and there's no easy answers, okay? So, but what I would suggest is, first of all, just to have the confidence in yourself, right? That you know what is right and what is wrong. And to be able to speak gently is always good. And to be able, just think about those poor kids who are brought into a Buddhist environment and then they're subject to that. What's that going to make? What impression is that going to make on them about what Buddhism is like, right? Well, how are they going to, what kind of association does that create for them for the rest of their lives about being in a temple or being in a Buddhist school? So have some compassion for them and try to do what we can, okay? Now, I'm going to run through a few possibilities. maybe these will be workable for you and maybe not. So one possibility might be that you can speak to the teachers involved. You already mentioned a little bit about that. So sometimes it's possible. Ideally, you don't do that in the heat of the moment, right? You wait until there's a nice time to do that, and you say to them, oh, look, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up, but look, there's something that I really noticed in the classroom. You know, I noticed that when I speak with the students really gently, that they respond to that and that they seem to be a lot happier to be here. And that when they're being yelled at, that, you know, that's not really, and so you try to introduce it in a way that's going to be helpful. Now, sometimes that will be effective, right? Sometimes people are yelling because maybe they're just in a bad mood. Maybe they're grumpy. Maybe they're working too hard. Who knows? There can be many reasons. But sometimes that's not going to work as well. Sometimes people are too stuck in their ways. They're too conceited. They're not going to change. In that case, you can try. The next step you could try is going above their heads to whoever the management is or the organizer, and to speak to them. And again, this is not gossiping, because you're not doing it to hurt that other teacher or those other volunteers. You're doing it to help the kids. So you keep that clear motivation in your mind that you're there to help the kids and to promote the teacher's right speech. So you try that and you talk about possible solutions with them. Maybe that will work. Maybe it doesn't work. If those things don't work, you also mentioned that you're thinking of leaving. That also is possible. The Buddha did that as well. Right? When the Buddha was in Kosambi, the monks were arguing, yelling at each other, and the Buddha tried to settle it, tried to stop them, and he failed. Can you imagine? Okay? Can you imagine? The Buddha is there, and he says, stop this arguing. And you say, no, I'm going to keep arguing. Right? So don't feel bad if you can't solve it, because even the Buddha sometimes couldn't solve it. That's just how it is. It's just how people are. And then the Buddha tried his best, and when it didn't work, he took his bowl and his robes and he walked off into the forest and said, when everybody's quarreling, nobody thinks that they're the fool. Right? So that's also okay for you to go away, because when you make that comment and you're speaking from a good and wholesome intention, it's really important that you cherish that and you preserve that, because that's so beautiful and so powerful. And if you let that go sour and brittle and nasty because you're in a bad environment, then that doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help you, and it certainly doesn't help the students. So you're much better off, if you can't solve it, then take a step out, leave it alone, and some other opportunity will present itself. Don't worry about it. Yeah? Something else will happen. There'll be some other case where you can contribute in a way without feeling that. So I hope that's of help. Okay, so briefly going on, Sriyani asks, Bhante, how do you distinguish between stray karma and non-stray karma? Partly it's to do with the ethical intent of it, right? Like whether there's a strong choice to do good, greed, hatred, and delusion or not, but also it's like how much you focus on it and how much time you spend into it. So the more time you spend in and the more seriously you're taking it, then the more focused that it is. Okay. Another anonymous says, I mentioned that we often do not hear Buddhist perspectives in worldly contexts such as Gaza. Buddhism generally teaches non-interference in worldly matters, unless directly invited for guidance. For instance, when King Ajatasattu killed his father to seize the throne, the Buddha did not organize protest against him, but rather offered wisdom to those who sought it. What are your views on this approach? How does the Buddhist practice of non-interference align with its principles of compassion and peace in the face of global conflicts? Well, I think there's a basic problem here with your argument there, is that was the Buddha. The Buddha wasn't saying that everybody has to be like that. For most of the people who are on this talk, then you're lay people. You're not living as renunciates. Now, if somebody was a monk or a nun who made that choice, I'm just going to live in the forest and meditate and not get interfered in worldly things, then I would always think, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I think it's wonderful that people are practicing in that way. But that's not, the Buddha is not saying, the Buddha did not say that we should have a policy of non-interference in worldly affairs. That is completely untrue. And the Buddha said that we live, and the Buddha many, many, many times talked about how we can live as part of the world in a good and wholesome and constructive way. All right. So Obviously, when we are speaking, we bear those things in mind. We speak truthfully, we speak honestly, we speak kindly, we speak gently, we speak constructively. Okay, moving on. Kusum asks, because where should we place rebirth in Paticca Samuppada? Look, Kusum, I'm going to skip over that topic a little bit, because if I'm going to talk about dependent origination, it's going to take another hour and a half at least. So out of compassion for all of you, but basically dependent origination or Paticca Samuppada is the Buddha's explanation of how rebirth takes place without a soul. Prasanta says our rebirth depends on the last thought or chitta. No, it does not. What is the conceptual difference between the final judgment of other religion? No, rebirth doesn't depend on the last chitta. The Buddha never said that. In fact, the Buddha said that your karma depends on your rebirth depends on the moral deeds that you do through your life. A chitta is not a karma. A chitta is a mind or a thought, and is not a karma. Most people are not making karma at the time of death. 99% of people are not making any karma at the time of death, and what their chitta is going to have no effect on where they get reborn. The only examples where somebody's mind state at the time of death affects their rebirth, the Buddha gave 2 examples of that in the suttas. Number 1 was when a warrior goes into battle thinking to kill the other person, and when their mind is full of hatred and violence, and then they get killed, yes, that's going to affect your rebirth. Or the other case was when somebody who'd lived a bad life, a corrupt life, who reformed on their deathbed, developed deep Brahma Vihara meditation on their deathbed, then yes, that was also a case where the mind at the time of death would influence their rebirth, because they created strong karma at that time of rebirth. Most people are lying in a hospital, or they're driving their car down to get some milk, or something happens, and they're not making any particularly good or bad karma at the time of death, and the state of mind is not going to affect your rebirth. Okay, moving on. Anonymous asks, hi Bhante, do psychopaths experience the effect of their actions? Yes, if they lack the conscience to judge themselves or feel bad for those actions. Interesting point, right? Interesting point. But yes, psychopaths do. And I think it's kind of different. It's interesting to sort of think about. One thing to bear in mind is that not all psychopaths are bad. Psychopaths also have the chance to be able to do good. And there's actually a lot of people who suffer from what psychologists would call antisocial personality disorder, who are actually good people. But they're not good people because they feel that they should be good. They're good people because they calculate that it will be for their benefit to be good, right? But they still do good things, right? They don't commit crimes, not because they think it's wrong to commit crimes because it'll hurt someone, but because they calculate, if I commit a crime, I might get caught and then I'd go to jail and that would be bad, so I shouldn't commit the crime, right? So psychopaths can still do good or bad, even though they lack the sense of moral shame. So in a sense, they have a pathway to goodness, but it's a different pathway than the rest of us. I think it's a very interesting question, and I think that and one of the reasons why I understand this was I read an interesting article some years ago about somebody who was a psychopath, and they were in a marriage, and they actually worked with their wife to actually try to live and to try to be a good person. And it was really interesting that the wife was like stuck with them through this and enabled them to actually become a good person, even though they were a psychopath. Okay, so Lakshman, how are we going for time? Can we continue, or do we need to wrap up?
I think we can do maybe another 2 questions and finish up. 2?
Okay.
Is it all right? Yeah.
Okay, so Dharini Raja Singham, how's it going, Dharini? Asks about whether euthanasia is acceptable from a karmic perspective to help somebody who's suffering and in pain. This is one of the most difficult questions which any of us are going to have to face in life, and because of advances in medical technology, it is one that more and more of us are going to have to face when it comes to ourselves or it comes to our relatives. And so, of course, it's a very difficult one. On the one hand, obviously, we want to preserve life, and so this is one thing. On the other hand, we also want to alleviate suffering. So this is another thing. The Buddha said that sometimes karma is both black and white, with both black and white results. And sometimes we might be wanting to do one thing, and maybe it's euthanasia. It happens a lot with people who have pets as well. Maybe you have a pet who's sick and suffering, and the vet says, oh, you need to put the pet down. And then you're like, oh, I can't do that. This is bad karma. Yeah? But so sometimes karma can be both good and bad, and you can't reduce it to being just one or the other. Right? It can have a bad component and a good component as well. So in those kinds of cases, it's useful for us to reflect on the golden rule. What would we want if we were in that situation? How would your life like to be if you're in that situation? And you try to do the best that you can. And so from a Buddhist point of view, I think it's important that we respond with as much compassion as we can for anybody who's put into that situation, not to be judging and condemning people who are making a very difficult choice, a very difficult decision in a very difficult and painful situation. And then they need our compassion and our support, because unless we're in that situation, we don't know what we would do there. Okay, so moving on. Ananda, hi Ananda, how's it going? Has asked a couple of questions. If there's not enough time, answer the second. Actually, no, I'm just going to briefly answer the first one. So in my translation, sometimes I translate mano as intention. Basically, mano means mind, but it's often used in contexts that emphasize intention. So sometimes I distinguish it in that way. So then second question, there's a distinction in the suttas between limited karma, right, and limitless karma, which is, so basically the limitless karma is the karma that's produced from the power of jhana, right? It's appamana karma. It's not actually 100% limit. It's not limitless in the sense that it lasts forever or is eternal or something, but relatively speaking, it comes from the limitless mind of jhana, which is so much more powerful and will overcome more mundane karmas that we might want to do. So that's really that distinction that the Buddha is making there. Okay,
Right.
I think
Thank you.
that's about it.
Right. Yeah. So thank you, Bhante. I think you almost covered all the questions, and I'm sure that all our Dhamma friends are quite happy about the Dhamma talk, plus also the Q&A. So can I invite Kamal to pay merit and thanksgiving to Bhante?
Thank you.
Kamal has a problem with the video, Bhante, so he will not be able to put the video.
My apologies about the video, Bhante. Thank you very much, Lakshman. The bhikkhus and bhikkhunis and all the Dhamma friends who has participated in this very, very interesting Dhamma talk on the Medin full moon day. We are very, very fortunate to have Bhante Sujato once again giving us the afternoon Dhamma talk, a very important topic, the role of karma and the bridge, inner growth and outer action in Buddhism. All your Dhamma sessions, Bhante, is really interesting, and we have such a big audience. Today, being a working day, we had over 150 participants with us today, and it shows how much they wish to listen to you. And on behalf of the National Dhamma program, much merit to you, Bhante, and look forward to the next Dhamma talk in the not too distant future. And I missed you in London, so I hope we can catch up in Sri Lanka.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll be in Sri Lanka in late May, early June. So hopefully I can see all of you there, yeah. And maybe Lakshman, you can let people know of those details that come closer to the time, yeah?
Yes. We will inform everyone.
Yes.
Thank you, Kamal. Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks so
Lakshman.
much.
Good Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So once again, we pay much merit and thank Bhante. Can I also just make a small announcement to all our participants that we have the second evening Dhamma program that is at 6 p.m. So they can use the same link that is there in order that they could attend to it. So Bhante, may I invite Bhante to transfer merit to the Devas and the departed. So.
Okay. Akasatta Chabumata Devanaga Mahidika Panyang Tang Anamodantu Chirangrakhantu Sasanang Akasatta Chabumata Devanaga Mahidika Panyang Tang Anamodantu Chirangrakhantu Desanang Akasatta Chabumata Devanaga Mahidika Panyang Tang Anamodantu Chirangrakhantu Mamparang Etavata Jamhe Sambhatang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Deva Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Jamhe Sambhatang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Bhuta Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Etavata Jamhe Sambhatang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Satta Anumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Idam me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idam me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idam me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Bhante, I must also thank Ms. Deepika because she's been really coordinating with us and assisting us. I know that she's
course,
also
yeah.
tower of strength to Bhante also. I think she's not too well, she said, but we are very thankful to her and we pay much merit to Bhante. Thank you.
Yes, yes, thank you so much. And may the merit from this evening be for Deepika's well-being. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Lakshman.
Thank you, Bhante. Then now we will.
Dr. Sumana, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.